A single choice leads an ordinary traveler toward an unexpected truth hidden along a quiet river path, and every gentle bend of the water pulls them closer to a revelation they never knew they needed. Daniel lived most of his life in quiet patterns that felt safe but slowly drained the color from everything around him. He rose at the same hour each day, walked the same streets, bought the same food, spoke to the same people, and ended each night with the same television flickering across the same dim room. He convinced himself this was comfort, yet deep down he sensed a stillness inside him that had hardened into something else, something he did not have the courage to name. He never thought of travel as anything more than unnecessary disruption. Airplanes made him tense, crowds overwhelmed him, and long trips felt like invitations for disappointment. So he stayed home year after year, telling himself that predictable days were better than uncomfortable ones. One afternoon, as he returned from work, he stopped near a small cafe whose outdoor tables were nearly full. The soft rumble of conversations flowed around him, but one particular exchange drifted into his awareness. Two strangers spoke in low, thoughtful voices. The first man said that a river cruise had changed his life in ways he was still trying to understand. The second answered that he had felt something on the river too, like a presence moving beside the boat, as though the current carried messages that only patient hearts could hear. Daniel slowed, without meaning to. Their words lingered in the air like threads pulling at him. He knew the feeling of seeking something without knowing what it was. Their voices carried a weight he could not ignore. The idea of a river cruise stayed lodged in his mind for days, rising each time he thought it had slipped away. He finally booked the trip impulsively, one quiet night, without asking advice, without announcing it to anyone. He chose a modest route along a slow, winding river known more for its beauty than excitement. He convinced himself he needed a break, but underneath he felt an unmistakable pull, as if the river had already begun calling him before he ever stepped aboard. On the morning of departure, Daniel boarded the vessel, expecting very little. He anticipated calm water, distant trees, perhaps a few pleasant meals. He hoped his mind would quiet after years of constant buzzing, yet from the moment he stepped onto the deck, something subtle shifted around him. The air felt strangely charged, as though the river carried an invisible pulse. The other passengers caught his attention immediately. There was an elderly woman who spent every spare moment gazing toward the shoreline with unwavering focus, as if she expected something to rise from the trees. There was a young couple who smiled for the sake of appearance, yet argued in soft, tense whispers when they believed no one watched. And there was a tall, solitary man who avoided speaking to anyone at all, choosing instead to walk the decks at night with slow, deliberate steps, as though mapping the length of the river with his own body. Daniel felt out of place at first, but the longer he remained on board, the more he noticed that everyone around him seemed to carry their own quiet burdens. They were not vacationers seeking fun, they were seekers of something undefined. As the hours passed, Daniel began to experience strange flickers of recognition. The houses scattered along the early stretch of the river resembled places he had visited as a child, even though he knew he had never been near this region. The rhythm of the water tapping against the hull matched a melody he faintly remembered his mother humming when he was young. He tried to dismiss these coincidences as imagination, yet each one felt too precise, too gently insistent on. The third day, the ship docked at a small riverside town lined with old stone paths and wooden beams shaped by decades of wind. Daniel stepped off the boat, feeling a tug inside him. He wandered through narrow alleys until he came to a tiny shop filled with handmade carvings. One carving in particular caught his breath. It bore a symbol identical to one from a childhood storybook his mother used to read to him. He remembered the exact moment she showed it to him on a faded page, explaining that it was a symbol meant for travelers who had lost their way. Though he had forgotten it for years, the sight of the carving struck him with sudden clarity. He asked the artisan behind the counter about the symbol. The artisan smiled gently and said it belonged to an old tradition among river communities, a symbol meant to welcome those who carried heavy questions, those in need of quiet places that could speak without words. Daniel returned to the ship with a strange heaviness inside him. Something was shifting, he could feel it, yet he could not understand what the river wanted him to remember. That evening, the river stretched into a long, shimmering line beneath the sunset. The sky deepened into a deep, warm red before slowly fading into night. A hush fell over the passengers. The air felt thick with unspoken tension. Daniel stood alone at the railing listening. To the sounds of the water, the river felt alive, as if whispering its own thoughts just below the surface. He sensed that something was approaching, something woven into the current long before he arrived. He felt pulled forward like a thread being drawn into a tapestry he had never realized he belonged to, and the night was only beginning. Daniel woke to the gentle rocking of the ship, the early morning mist curling over the river, surface like smoke from a distant fire. He wrapped his hands around the railing, feeling the chill seep through his sleeves, yet also a warmth that seemed to originate from within the river itself. He looked toward the shore and saw the outlines of trees blurred in fog, and felt an inexplicable certainty that the path ahead was not random. The elderly woman was already at the deck, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She did not turn as he approached, but he felt her awareness, as if she knew he had questions he had not yet formed into words. Finally she spoke. In a voice soft yet certain, she told him that the river listens to those who dare to be still, and that it shows only what a traveler is ready to see. Daniel could not respond, for words felt inadequate in the presence of such quiet authority. That day the fog thickened and the river became a silver ribbon threading between shadows. The other passengers moved in slow, measured steps, as if the water itself demanded patience. Conversations ceased, and even the young couple who usually whispered arguments fell silent. The solitary man appeared beside Daniel for the first time. Without speaking, he pointed toward a faint glow that shimmered along the riverbank. Daniel understood immediately that the river was calling him. When the ship slowed, the captain announced an unscheduled stop. A clearing opened to the mist and to the waiting sky. The passengers were urged to step off if they felt drawn. Daniel felt the pull before he saw the words. He stepped onto the soft, wet earth, following the solitary man, who continued to move as though guided by an invisible map. The clearing was simple, with reeds brushing against the edges of the river and a few scattered stones. He felt no excitement, only a deep pulling sensation inside his chest, as though memories he had buried were surfacing without invitation. He remembered his mother telling him about a river in her dreams, a place of clarity, courage, and peace. She hoped he would one day find it was here. The air smelled faintly of earth and water, and he realized this was the river she had described. Daniel felt the weight of years lift slightly from his shoulders. The surprising reason for this journey became clear. The river had not brought him adventure or distraction, but a mirror of himself, a space to confront the things he had avoided, the years of routine, the fear of uncertainty, the longing for connection. All became visible in the stillness of this place. He breathed deeply, letting the water and mist and light seep into him, loosening the tightness he had carried for decades. He returned to the ship feeling different, light and heavy at once, free and yet profoundly aware of all he had held inside him. As he walked among the passengers, he noticed their faces anew, understanding that each traveler had arrived seeking some fragment of themselves, and that the river offered it only to those willing to see. That night, Daniel stayed at the railing longer than usual, watching the reflection of the moon shimmer across the water. He could sense stories carried by the current, stories of love, loss, hope, and discovery flowing alongside him, invisible yet tangible. He understood that the river had shown him something far beyond what he had expected, that the true gift was not the landscape, not the journey, but the confrontation with his own heart. In the stillness, Daniel felt a quiet happiness settle inside him. He realized he no longer feared change or uncertainty. The river had delivered clarity and courage in a form he could not have imagined. Standing there, he felt connected to every person aboard, every place he had ever been, and every memory he had tried to forget. The river had made him see and feel in ways he had thought impossible. He finally stepped away from the railing and walked inside the ship. He passed the elderly woman, who nodded slightly as if acknowledging what he had discovered. The young couple walked quietly hand in hand without argument, and the solitary man continued his silent watch of the water, yet his posture was lighter, as if he too had glimpsed something profound. As the ship drifted back into the open river, Daniel remained attentive to every ripple, to every whisper of the wind, to the gentle sway of the vessel beneath him. He knew that the journey was not simply over, that the river would continue to speak to him in memory, in dreams, in moments of quiet reflection.